Hi, I'm Phil Harbottle, and this is my 76th YouTube video in which I'm taking a look at the classic Merridew Western series by British SF writer John Russell Fearn. We see here the 5 Merridew novels, hardcover first editions, published annually by World's Work from 1949 through to 1953. They had a very interesting genesis. Replying to a fan letter from Tyro author and film buff William F. Temple in 1938, Fearn had told him how he picked up ideas for characters and characterization from his regular watching of films. Fearn became Temple's friend and mentor, and they exchanged many letters, some of which Fearn signed as Frank Jones. Fearn went to great lengths to make everyone, fans and editors alike, think that his pseudonym Thornton Eyre was genuinely another person. To this end, Frank Jones was created, who was supposed to share a house with Fearn and his mother, whilst operating under the Eyre pseudonym. Temple himself recalled to me these letters from Thornton Eyre, whom Jack kept trying to kid me was really another person. I didn't believe it, but I played along with him for the fun of it. Now, Fearn used to loan Temple his copies of the American pulp magazines in which he was appearing, which he had stories. Many letter exchanges followed when Temple wrote reviewing the Fearn stories he'd just finished reading. Reviewing that story you see there, Lunar Intrigue by Thornton Eyre, in the November 1939 Fantastic Adventures, Temple wrote, "As for Lunar Intrigue, a rattling good gangster story with a real tough hero who spoke and acted in convincing character all the way through. Perhaps I've got a cinema complex, but Ace reminded me strongly of Charles Bickford in The Gangs of New York. The role was practically identical. Was it coincidence, or do you think Frank would be annoyed if I asked him whether he saw that film?" To which Fearn readily admitted, "Unquestionable Lunar Intrigue was based on Gangs of New York, and number 7 was Bickford himself. Have you never seen a film and reinterpreted it into science fiction? Here is the secret of fast writing and pure characterization. I admire your cinematic hawk eye. Keep this to yourself. I don't want my secret methods handed around to all and sundry." After discussing other stories and films, Fearn added, "No, I don't twist new plots to new yarns right away from films. I usually use one ages old, because I have a singular kink for being able to recall complete scenes and pictures for 10 or 15 years back when I want. Then I twist them." Many years later, on reading my 1965 Fearn fanzine, The Ultimate Analysis, wherein I had commented on the originality of Fearn's Western series character, Jenkinson Talbot Merridew, Bill Temple told me that he thought it highly likely that in fact Fearn had based his character on the 1935 film Ruggles of Red Gap. At that time, I had no way of substantiating Temple's claim, as I'd never seen the old film and had no means of doing so. Nowadays, however, it's possible to see the film and commentaries about it thanks to the wonders of YouTube. I've recently learned that Ruggles of Red Gap was initially a novel by Harriet Leon Wilson and had first been serialized in the Saturday Evening Post before its publication as a book in 1915. It had been a bestseller and had subsequently spawned a stage play and a silent film version. It had then been redone as a talkie in 1935 and had been chosen as a vehicle for rising Hollywood star Charles Laughton. The comedic film had been a great success, receiving Academy nominations for Laughton, only losing out to another Laughton film that same year. It had been directed by Leo McCarey, who would then go on to fame and awards with his later films. Such was the appeal of the film that in 1950 the screenplay was adapted as an American radio play directed by Cecil B. DeMille, with Lawton and some of his co-stars reprising their film roles. So appealing was the story that it would also be adapted, retitled as Fancy Pants, that same year as a film vehicle for Bob Hope, who starred alongside Lucille Ball. Ruggles of Red Gap was set in 1908 and tells how Lawton, as Marmaduke Ruggles, an English butler and son of a long line of gentlemen's gentlemen, is obliged to travel to America and become the valet to a prominent family in the small town of Red Gap. The film develops as an engrossing comedy, exploring how the English genteel character of Ruggles copes with the brash idiosyncrasies of American cowboys and the Old West. Temple had been entirely correct. Fearn'S Merridew Western series was indeed inspired by the film, although Fearn had added many twists and changes to create something new. Merridew was based directly on Lawton's Ruggles, adopting his character and background and manner of speaking as an erudite and quintessential English gentleman. Indubitably, sir. But Fearn had then put his own spin on the character. Whilst Lawton was then only slightly on the plump side and in his mid-30s, Fearn's Merridew was immensely fat and late middle-aged. See from that cover there, and also on that one. In Fearn's version, Merridew was a butler to a dissolute English playboy, Bradley Wood. When Wood's health deteriorated, they'd moved from London to Arizona. Merridew hoped and believed that the change of climate and the challenging lifestyle would be the making of Wood, and such proved to be the case. Aided by the resourceful Merridew, Wood recovers his health and reforms his character. In due course, he becomes the sheriff of a backwoods Arizona town, Double Peak, and marries a local girl, whilst Merridew becomes mayor. The novels actually have a modern setting taking place in the early 1950s. Although the characters in the backwoods towns all ride around on horses, wearing gun belts and acting just like old-time cowboys, very anachronistic, they are invaded from time to time by modern outsiders who arrive in automobiles and trucks. There are even scenes involving 1950s modern aircraft and radio communications, and the cow town of Double Peak eventually becomes a mining town as well, when uranium is discovered. Each of the 5 novels in the series is entirely self-contained and has a resolution. They are ingeniously plotted, some impossible crime, mystery and detective elements, packed with action and humour, much of the comedy revolving around the fact that Merridew is around 60 and weighs nearly 20 stone. However, he is strong, fantastically clever and resourceful, and has a completely ruthless streak when it comes to dealing with outlaws and murderers. Fearn had added an extra dimension to Merridew's character, so that he was more akin to his golden Amazon than to Lawton's genial soul. He could be deadly, even vicious, when dishing out his own form of justice to owl hooters. Today, I've successfully contrived to have all 5 novels returned to print, but before we look at these editions, we need to look at another series which I myself created, which was a direct offshoot. Back in 2000, in my capacity as a literary agent, I was commissioned by editor John Hale to help him maintain the Robert Hale Black Horse line of 10 new Western titles every month, after the publisher had recently lost a lot of his regular writers. They had been reselling their old books under changed titles, and the furious publisher had sacked him when he learned he'd been duped. He desperately needed replacement writers and sought my help. My Cosmos Literary Agency clients by then included some of the UK's most prolific Western novelists, such as Sidney J. Bounds, John Russell Fearn, John Glasby, Anthony A. Glynn, here writing as Ken Brompton, Gordon Lansborough, and E.C. Tubb. My still active writers, Bounds, Glasby and Glynn, were also able to supply many new novels along with scores of their older titles which Hill reprinted with due acknowledgements alongside the older published works of Fearn, Lansborough and Tubb. Now I myself also supplied 4 new novels that were based around a number of disparate Fearn short stories and novelettes that had appeared only in 1940s magazines. But as we were supplying nearly all of their titles, Hale insisted that we had to employ numerous pseudonyms. See some of my pseudonyms there. As copyright holder of all Fearn stories by virtue of his widow's will, I was legally entitled to create these posthumous collaborations. I had to completely rewrite and stitch 2 and sometimes 3 separate stories together, changing all the different heroes and heroines to the same person. I also had to insert a good deal of my own new link-up material to expand them to novel length and make them read smoothly, whilst retaining much of Fearn's original text, suitably edited. Did these fix-ups work? Well, they can't have been too bad, as they were twice reprinted. First by Ulverscroft, see the Ulverscroft large print editions there, and then they in turn were reprinted by Loom Books, which we see along the bottom there. These are still in print 20 years on. But there was an important proviso imposed by Hale's library buyers. We could only reprint old paperbacks. Under no circumstances would the library buyers accept any hardcover reprints, paperbacks only. Fortunately, my authors had published westerns mostly in paperback. Only Fearn had done hardcovers in any quantity. So for the next few years, we supplied Hale with scores and scores of old paperback titles, with a good deal of new novels, 10 books every month using myriad pseudonyms, and saved the Black Horse line from extinction at that time. Now, in my opinion, Fearn's Merridew Western series represented some of his very best work. I was acutely disappointed that it couldn't be used, just because it had been published decades earlier in hardcover. I had in fact earlier succeeded in returning to print the last of the 5 Merridew novels, Merridew Follows the Trail, through another publisher, F.A. Thorpe, in this 1992 large print edition. But they'd chosen to publish it as a standalone, leaving the 4 other Merridew novels unreprinted. There was also a second barrier to their use. The World's Work hardcovers were around 55,000 words in length, whilst the Black Horse format was limited to only around 40,000 words. By the time the limited supply of Fearn Western short stories and novelettes had been used up, I was on a roll myself as an author, having learned to write in a good pastiche of Fearn's style and thoroughly enjoying doing it. So I hit on the idea of rewriting the Merridew character so that my books generally qualified as brand new works to satisfy Hale's library buyers. As I mentioned, the Merridew Westerns actually had a modern setting taking place in the 1950s, although all the characters in the backwoods towns acted just like old-time cowboys. My brainwave was to rewrite them all to Hale's shorter length, but effectively disguise their origins by having them actually take place in the Old West round about 1890. No cars, no aircraft, no radio, no uranium. The unmarried, bowler-hatted Merridew became Randall Meredith, a widowed upper-class Bostonian businessman who wore a Homburg. And instead of butler to the secondary hero, I made him his father, Meredith's wife having died young. There was an older son, David, who had left Boston high society to strike out on his own, establishing a cattle ranch in the small town of Mountain Peak in Arizona. Meredith brings his wayward younger son to visit David, hoping to effect his reformation as in Fearn'S original. But on arriving in Mountain Peak, Meredith discovers that his eldest son has been murdered, so he and his younger son remain to investigate and avenge his death. Eventually, Meredith becomes mayor of the town, whilst his son becomes sheriff and marries a local girl. So, whilst genuinely creating a new work, I was also able to assimilate Meredith to follow in Merridew's footsteps, whilst retaining much of Fearn'S original plotting. So, much as Fearn had twisted Ruggles to create something new in Merridew, now I was twisting Merridew in much the same way. I rewrote the first novel and the second, abridging and rewriting both as Meredith's Justice and as Meredith's Gold. But the remaining third and fourth novels, Merridew Marches On and Merridew Fights Again, posed real problems because of the modern 1950s settings, especially the first one, which has a plot involving the discovery of uranium and subsequent mining operations. My final novel, Meredith's Treasure, 2005, was my answer to this conundrum. I cunningly merged the two novels together into one, carefully retaining all the impossible crime elements from the third novel and all the plotting and characters from both. And I like to think in places tweaked and improved upon them, adding material of my own. I also changed all the names of the characters to those of my family, relatives and friends. Since this was an impossible crime novel, I renamed one of the main villains, Dr. Grayson, as Dr. Adie, as a tribute to my late friend Bob Adie, the author of the classic reference book Locked Room Murders, and a noted expert on impossible crime novels. Bob told me that he'd enjoyed my impossible crime western. The uranium discovery is jettisoned and replaced by finding an ancient Indian treasure, featured in the fourth novel, which seamlessly substitutes for it and retains all the original plot strands and motivations. All the impossible crime plotting in Merridew Marches On is retained, essentially unchanged. All three of my Meredith novels were later reprinted as large print paperbacks by Ulverscroft, which we see here. Whilst Fearn'S fifth Merridew novel, Merridew Follows the Trail, is currently in print as a Loom Books paperback and e-book. Finally, I had all the remaining four original Merridew novels returned to print by Wildside in the USA. We see their paperbacks here. Anyone who enjoys Fearn'S detective fiction will also likely enjoy these too.